All right. We're almost there.
Does anybody want to mute themselves when they're not speaking? I'm hearing lots of silence. So it's, to me so far, it sounds really good. But if you're worried about it, you can definitely mute and unmute, or we can mute you as well.
Good idea. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Nevada County Community Library's 3rd Annual Local Author Showcase. As you can see, this year looks a little bit different than past years, but we are so glad we're able to still come together again and offer a great week of programming and discussions with our local authors and community. So today's webinar is Fiction Friday Forum. Our very own Amy will be our facilitator for the evening. I am Casey. I'm going to be your techie for the night, and we are currently streaming to YouTube as well as the Local Author Showcase website. I'll be keeping an eye out for any questions or comments in the chat, or you'll find a Q&A button down below on your screen. So feel free to use either one of those to ask questions for our authors, and we'll try our best to answer those toward the end of the webinar. Thanks, everybody, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy now.
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, welcome everybody. I'm here live in the basement of the Grass Valley Library in the children's area. Casey's kind of behind me in another room. We're glad you could join us here. We're so happy to have 4 really accomplished authors joining us today. A couple from Truckee and some, I think, from elsewhere. I guess we'll find out here as we go. So, so welcome to June, Celeste, Avanti, and Shirley. I'm going to give them a brief introduction, and then I prepared some questions for them, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So, so Avanti, we're going to start with you. If you want to give a wave so people know who you are. There you are. And where are you today, Avanti? Are you here in Grass Valley or Nevada City? Or?
I live in the Penn Valley, Smartsville area.
Oh, great. Well, welcome to the webinar. So Avanti Centre is the author of the international multi-award-winning and #1 best-selling Van Ops thriller series, an instant Barnes & Noble Nook bestseller. The Lost Power took home a genre grand prize ribbon at the Chanticleer International Book Awards, a bronze medal at the Wishing Shelf Awards, and an honorable mention at the Hollywood Book Festival. Solstice Shadows quickly became a #1 Amazon bestseller before winning a bronze medal at the Reader's Favorite Book Awards and the Global Thrillers Genre Grand Prize at the recent Chanticleer International Book Awards. Her work has been compared to that of James Rollins, Steve Berry, Dan Brown, and Clive Cussler, but has a voice all its own. She resides in Northern California with her family and her German Shepherds. So welcome, Avanti.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy you're here. Celeste, do you want to give a wave so people know who you are? There we are. And I know Celeste is joining us from Truckee today. Celeste Leon is the author of Luck is Just the Beginning, a novel inspired by a true story. When 19-year-old Ramon Leon wins the Puerto Rican lottery, he believes that his promise to establish the first dental and medical clinic in his village will be achievable. But an unexpected chain of catastrophic events intervenes. Luck is Just the Beginning is not only the enchanting story of the joys and sorrows of family, but also the saga of one man's determination to never give up on his dream. The book earned first place in the 2018 Latino Books into Movies Awards for Bioepic, a Mariposa Award for Best First Book in the 2016 International Latino Book Awards, and finalist in Multicultural Fiction in the 2016 International Book Awards. Celeste was named one of the top 10 new Latino authors of 2017 to watch and read by LatinoStories.com and the Latino Book Club of New York. She is also the author of several award-winning essays and a children's story set in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Ms. Leon lives in Truckee and is a physical therapist and an alumna of the Squaw Valley Community of Writers. So welcome, Celeste. Let's see, and June. Hey, you want to give a wave, June? June is also joining us from Truckee, so welcome, June. June Sylvester Sarcino is the author of Farrell, North Carolina, 1965, her debut novel, listed in BuzzFeed as one of the 18 must-read books from smaller presses. The Girl from Yesterday, her third poetry collection, was released in January 2020. Her previous poetry books are Of Dirt and Tar, Altars of Ordinary Light, and a chapbook of prose poems, Mean Girl Trips. She serves as Humanities and English Department Chair at Sierra Nevada University, Lake Tahoe, where she teaches in the undergraduate and graduate creative writing programs. She's the director of the literary speaker series, Writers in the Woods, and founding editor of the Sierra Nevada Review. So welcome, June. And then Shirley Descartes. Shirley, do you want to give us a wave? There you are. Thanks for joining us, Shirley. Shirley is, as a fourth generation Californian, Shirley Descartes has always been passionate about living close to the land and protecting the earth. Her first novel, Heartwood, For Women, For the Earth, For the Future, was written from the homestead her husband and she built in the 1970s in the Sierra Nevada, where they raised their family in a community of back to the landers. When she inherited her great-grandmother's scrapbook from the gold rush days, she knew she had to tell her story. That was the seed that grew into her eco novel, Heartwood. An RN by profession, she has drawn on her background in pediatrics, school nursing, and public health to enrich this intricately woven story of 3 generations of women protecting the earth and the future. She's a member of Sierra Writers, a founding member of the Sierra Muses Press, a former co-producer of the Nevada County Women's Writing Salon, and a senior editor of the Comptonville Courier community newspaper. When not writing, she can be found walking in the woods with her husband and dog, spending time with her daughters' families, volunteering in the community, attending their large homestead garden, canning tomatoes, and saving seeds. I'm not sure when you write, Shirley, but I'm sure that you do. So welcome, everyone. This is such an amazing panel of such accomplished writers. Reading through your bios before we started here was just got me really, really excited to talk to you all and find out more about your writing. So one thing we want to do as a library is celebrate the accomplishments of our local writers, but also provide a way for the community to access writers, ask questions, and learn from them as well. So that's what these questions are designed to do. So I'm going to start with June. And you'll all get about 2 minutes to talk for each question. I'll let you know if your 2 minutes is close to up. And the first question, because writers usually have a story about how they came to writing, I'm curious about what inspires you to write. June, do you want to start?
Sure. I would say the thing that drives me to writing is anything that I can't forget, anything that sort of haunts my mind or is a question or a situation that I can't seem to shake. And so for Farrell, I was raised in the rural South, and it was this thing that I had been thinking about a lot, which kind of centers on the church ladies in that novel. I mean, how can people be so good, so nice, so loving, so wonderful, and so awful, and so racist, and so judgy? So when I have things like that, I work it out in fiction or poetry. And it doesn't always have to be a big thing like that. Like it might be passing somebody in a supermarket and the man turns to a woman and says, well, what do you want anyway? And I think about it for the rest of the day until those two people end up in a story. And he turns to her and says, well, what do you want anyway? And somehow now that makes sense because I put it in a story.
That's great. That's awesome. So personal experience and working things out for yourself as you come across them.
Haunt me.
Yeah.
I can't not think about.
That's great. Thanks. Celeste, how about you? What inspires you to write?
So I was always a lover of stories and kind of a strange child who preferred to sit alone and read, and my nose was always in a book. So my dad's story was so amazing about growing up in Puerto Rico, of the 15th kid in his family and winning the lottery and following his dream and keeping a promise to an old man in his village to help the whole town and become a dentist. There were no dentists in Puerto Rico at the time. And about 20 years ago or so, I read The Color of Water by James McBride, which was a memoir based on the author's mother and his own life. And his mother and my father had such similar projections in life, two people who came here amongst all obstacles and had such interesting peculiarities and made their way in the world. And I read this book and I thought, I've got to tell my dad's story. So writing is telling a story. It's changing people's minds. It's educating them about people whose lives are different than their own. And I thought, I've got to write my dad's story because it's so similar to Ruth McBride, the mother of the author. She came over. She was one of, I think, many. She had 18 or 15 children. My dad was the youngest of 15th. And there were such similarities. I thought, I've got to write my dad's story. And that started many years ago. It took me about 9 years to finish my book and see it to fruition. So that was my inspiration to start writing my story, reading something that was similar, wanting to tell this story to the world, because I think it's important for people to know how others overcome adversity. And and always being a lover of the written word, a lover of storytelling, wanting to tell something that's important and moving and things that people can learn about and enrich their own lives.
Well, thank you. That is a really interesting backstory to all of that. That's so cool. How about you, Avanti?
Yeah, so I was also one of those kids that really enjoyed reading and had my nose in a book. I remember being quite young, and there was a silver bookmobile that would come to the end of the street once a week, and I'd go down there and get a whole stack of books, yay big, that I'd bring home with me, and I'd read one a day. And then the next week I'd go back and turn them back in, and I had a great childhood that had some not so great moments, just like life, right? And I always knew I wanted to be an author, to keep people company during those times when life isn't so great. It's my version of buy the world a Coke, right? I want to buy the world a book, and I think that books, humans are hardwired to learn through storytelling. As I grew older, I tried to write a couple of times. I ended up writing a screenplay that never sold, and I tried writing some poetry, and that didn't go anywhere. And then in 2013, about the time I hit 50, I said, you know what? I think I need to make this happen, and it's going to be novels, and it's going to be thrillers, sort of that Da Vinci Code meets Tomb Raider type thing, because I really love writing action. For whatever reason, I have dreams quite often at night where the bad guys are chasing me and I have to save the world in the middle of the night while I'm asleep. And I thought, well, that's a great fodder for writing incredible fiction. So
well, thank you. That's great.
The Van Op series was born.
That's awesome. Thanks. Shirley, how about you? What was it that inspired you to begin writing, and what continues to inspire you, I guess?
Well, I would say that I'm inspired by questions. I think questions are really important to ask, much more so than answering them. So sometimes I have questions that keep mulling around in my mind, and that's in part what resulted in the book that I wrote, Heartwood. It's the question I had was, if current trends continue with the way we're living on the planet, the way we're degrading the environment and so forth, what's it going to be like in the future? And not just in general, you hear about what you save the planet for your great grandchildren and so forth. I wanted to know exactly what that was going to look like for them. So in my imagination, I just went forward into the future and created this world of Amisha in the future. And what it would look like if, there is no water, if California has burned up and so forth. So the questions of, suppose we continue losing our fertility, what's that going to look like in the future? So that was what motivated me to write. The other thing is, I love the natural world, and it always inspires me. Go out and take a walk, and the sights, the smells, the sounds, the touches, the feels, all that gets brought back into my writing, and it finds a way into my words and the world that I create. So I love writing when I'm in the right side of my brain, the creative, intuitive, flowing side, which is often what happens when I stay awake at night. And, those 2 hours in the middle of the night, like from 3 to 4 or 5, when you can't get back to sleep and the mind is just going like this. If I can capture that and bring that back to my writing in the morning, I try. In fact, I have sort of a little way that I do that. But anyway, so staying in the right side rather than the linear, logical, which is, as a nurse, I was trained to write very succinctly, observable behavior. Celeste would probably know the same thing as a physical therapist, is it? You write what you see and only what you can verify, which is very different. Writing reports and so forth. It's very different than writing a novel and writing fiction and fantasy. So,
Thanks. We're going to be able to dive in a little bit more to all of your process. That's the next question. So as you were talking, I was kind of starting to see you talking about that too, which is great. So, so Celeste, maybe you could start us with the next question. So tell us about your writing process. I know as an aspiring writer myself, I'm always curious, like Shirley was talking about, how do you capture those 2 hours of thought, in the middle of the night? How does that work for you? So Celeste, maybe let us know, like, how many drafts did you go through? How do you deal with your drafts? Are you a planner or a pantser? Do you just go by the seat of your pants, or do you plan everything ahead? Does the writing lead you, or are you leading your writing? However you want to talk about that. Everybody has a different process.
So I have way too many drafts to count. And I was in a writing group for 7 years. And my book came out right after the writing group disbanded, and just we all loved each other. It just had run its course. So every 2 weeks I would bring chapters to the writing group and edit it based on their feedback. So multiple drafts, and I wrote on the fly. I'm a mom. I was a mom of an elementary school girl at the time. So my writing was done during the day when she was at school and wasn't at work. And I would write literally in the car when she was at basketball practice or dance school. And every morning I started with good writing. I think that's really important. So every morning I read something wonderful, either fiction or the New Yorker or memoir, anything, just to get my mind of how to write well and how to and look at beautiful prose. So before I did my own work, I read others' work, whose work inspired me. And I would just write when I could, multiple drafts, and I relied heavily on feedback from my writers group. And I was very serious and worked really hard. And not only did I rely on their feedback, but I loved giving others feedback. So that was the whole process for my work. And it took anyone who thinks they can do it in a year or 2 years, I don't know, they're much smarter than I am. So it took me a lot of years to finish the book, probably about 9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds about right to me as well. It's a long process. Avanti, will you tell us what your writing process is like?
Yeah, and it's evolved over time. So earlier
Right.
I mentioned that I made a decision in 2013 that I was going to write a book. And I'd studied story structure and the like, so I wasn't necessarily starting from scratch, and I've been a lifelong reader, which helps. And I'm an outliner. So I wrote my first outline. It took me maybe 6 months or a year to write that outline because I kept adding things to it. I started kind of with the end in mind, but then I kept adding things to it. And then because I hadn't done it before, I wanted to get some feedback. So I reached out to a number of experts in the field who said, oh, your ending is too much like X, or your character needs a little more Y, or whatever. So I went back and I redid the whole outline. And once I was happy with it, then I started writing. And at the time, I was an IT executive for a Silicon Valley firm. And so I'd bang my head against my keyboard all day. And then once I ate dinner, I'd write a chapter at night. And I was able to finish the novel in about another year and got some additional feedback from some close friends and family. And then I started shopping it. And while I was shopping it to an agent and while she was shopping it to a publisher, I started working on the second one. And that one flowed a lot better because I already knew my characters and I was able to start where they left off. The last book that I wrote took me a lot less time to outline, but I spent a lot of time, besides just working on the story, outlining the characters as well, so that I knew that I really understood them. I outlined it. Again, I got feedback because I really like to get external ideas at that stage. And then I was able to write the novel in about 4 months. I was able to get to writing 2 or 3 chapters a day, which was a real stretch for me. So that was good. And right now I'm sort of back at the drawing board for my next book, and kind of in between where I'm trying to figure out what the next story is going to be all about. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That's a hopeful story that it gets easier, or it gets, you get more proficient at the process as you go.
Definitely.
That's great. Yeah, I like that. Thank you, Avanti. Shirley, do you want to tell us about your writing process?
Yeah, well, my book took 10 years, at least 10 years to write. So it wasn't full-time writing, of course. I would take breaks from it, get discouraged for a while, come back to it. But I had a general idea of what the story was, and actually it was weaving 3 women's stories together, so I could actually write. It depended on where I felt the energy. I would write into the past. I would write my great-grandmother's story and write that forward. And then maybe I'd skip over to the present and I'd write the woman who's a homesteader, basically based more like a memoir, write her life for a while. And then I would go into the future and write the future life. So then I'd go back and forth. And it just kind of depended upon where my mentality was at the time. The other thing, and I didn't plan too much. I kind of let the characters do a lot of the leading, and at times I would paint myself into a corner or write myself into a corner. And I would just give it to the characters. I would just go to bed and say, I don't know what I'm going to do here. I have no idea. You take it, I'm going to bed. And then I'd wake up in the morning and I'd start writing. And I was blown away how many times they had ideas I would never have thought of. They were just wonderful. And so anyway, that was one of my favorite ways of writing when I get stuck. The other thing I did, which I learned, was to write the ending first. And I would do that again if I wrote another book. It's like John Irving's quote about his writing Cider House Rules. He said that he begins with endings with last sentence, usually more than one sentence, often a last paragraph or two. I compose an ending and write toward it as if the ending were a piece of music I could hear, no matter how many years ahead of me it is waiting. And that's what actually would happen. We had a dinner guest, and we were talking about that idea, and his name was Roger, and he looked at me and he said, because he knew my story, he looked at me and he said, well, then this is your ending. And he told me what my ending was going to be. And I just got goosebumps. It was so spot on, so perfect. And a month later, he died. He unexpectedly died. And he left me with this gift of the ending of my story. Anyway, so thank you, Roger. It's for you.
That's great. I love that these are all so different as well. It's so awesome. June, how about you? Can you tell us about your process?
Yeah, but first I got to say hats off to Avante, because that's what I'd like to be my process. So, I don't know, it just sounds so efficient, but I have a very inefficient process. I'm a wanderer. I wander around, and ultimately the story sort of surfaces, and anywhere from 5 to 500 pages that got me there have to go away because it emerges. And then similar to Shirley, with Farrell, it was really an insistent character's voice that led me through that. I initially it was in short stories. I would write a story and I would think, okay, there, wrote that, did that. But her voice kept coming back, and then the character started to grow and change, and that's when I thought, oh, okay, this is actually a longer work. This isn't like 3 disconnected stories. This is a longer work where it's a coming of age story, and that became clear to me, but not because I planned it.
Thanks, June. You guys are amazing. I'm learning a lot listening to this. So thanks for sharing all of this. So we talked a little bit about, let's skip around a little bit. So if you could maybe talk about your path to becoming a published author. I know those can vary widely for everybody. But this is definitely something that most aspiring writers are interested in as well, because there are so many different paths and they're all really complicated, so they can be. So let's see, Avanti, will you start us off and talk about how you first got published, or maybe how that's changed too with your second book? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that once I had finished my first draft, it took me about a year to find an agent, and then it took her about a year to find a publisher. And I think if I had to do it over again, what I probably would have done is gotten a little bit more expert feedback at that stage for the book itself. So maybe one of the things that I've done for the last couple of books is I've hired a developmental editor myself, as well as a copy editor. And that, I think, makes the story much more polished. The thing that I've learned about the publishing industry is that it is not only incredibly competitive, but that most publishers don't make a whole lot of money off every book. So when the agents are looking at your work, they're looking at it, can I sell this thing? And how many copies is it going to sell? And once you've sold your first book, the editors of the publishing houses look to see, well, how many copies did that sell, and can we afford to publish the next one in the series? So it's very much a business, and I'd be happy to chat with anybody offline. There's some things I learned, some pitfalls here, some great things there. It's a rocky path, and many people talk about it being a marathon, and I think that that's really true, because not only does it take a long time, as we've all attested to getting that first book out the door, but even once they start to roll, it takes a really long time to get your name out there and to become a household word,
Yeah.
so to speak, so that people know what your brand is and what your work is all about, and that it's good and that they should buy it. It takes years. Most people say that it takes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books before they really got that breakthrough book where they were able to hit some type of, USA Today bestseller list or New York Times bestseller list. So
Well, maybe we'll have time to come back and you can tell us some of the tips and things that you've learned publishing, because those are always helpful for everyone wherever they're at in the process. So
yeah.
Thanks, Avante. How about you, Shirley? What was your publishing road like?
Well, I finished my book and I was 74 years old, and I knew I did not want to take the time to locate an agent and then have the agent, as Avanti was saying, to publishers, and then to have the publishers. I have a number of friends who are writers who went that process, and it took them a couple of years, and then they got turned down, or something happened, and it was very discouraging. And I know there's a lot of success stories too, but I just decided I didn't want to take that time. I'm getting too old. I need to get going, and I want the book out. And people have said this is a book. It's a timely book. It's a book for the times that we're in. And I wanted it out. So anyway, I think what I was found in Nevada County is there is, to be an independently published author, there is a lot of support, a lot of professionals who live in Nevada County or thereabouts, who I found a writing coach, editors, copy editors, proofreaders, layout design, illustrators, what's left? Anyway, everybody was here. And so I was able to work with mainly women that I trusted and I had a good relationship with. We had a lot of fun putting the book together. And so I'm really happy to have that control over this book is exactly how I wanted it to be. And my husband says I'm a control freak, which is true. So I didn't want to have somebody else coming in and making some changes on my book. So That's pretty much what I did. And I think that marketing was pretty much, well, we'll get into that later with COVID. That's another story.
Yeah,
Different than what I
right.
anticipated. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Shirley. Is anybody else hearing some of the noise on their end? I'm not seeing anyone making big movements. I'm not sure where that's coming from.
I'm not either, but we do have a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, great.
So this question is for Shirley, but I'm sure everyone can answer. But Wendy says, for Shirley, as you know from previous conversations, I absolutely loved reading your book. I bought like 20 and gave to friends and family. Are you going to, or are you in the process of writing another?
I think that's one of the questions that you're going to ask.
It
Yeah,
is.
so
Yes.
should we wait for that? Should we wait for that?
Sure. Let's do that. Maybe we can finish this round. If this is okay with you, Casey, we'll maybe finish this round of. That's okay. This round, and then we'll check in and go on to that question next. Because
that works.
I switched my order. That was going to be this question. Okay, so we heard from Shirley. So June, do you want to tell us about your writing process?
Sure.
Or sorry, not your writing process. Your publishing.
Yeah.
The path to publishing.
So to start with, publish, independent things in journals. So I built up to the larger things, and I've never had an agent, primarily because my first books were poetry books, and there's not, we don't get agents because poetry books don't make money because no one buys books of poetry. Everybody loves poetry and writes poetry, but no one buys poetry. So I was used to being agentless. And so with Feral, I basically submitted it to novel contests. And I was runner-up in a couple. And then finally Southern Fried Karma, which is another small independent press, picked it up for publication. I think the judge then was Pinckney Benedict. And I've since been able to meet him on a little Zoom podcast I did a little bit later. So I don't know if it's any shorter or longer than the agent route. I definitely think an agent could probably get a better deal for a writer. But because I'd never had one, I wasn't even thinking along those lines.
Wow, those are all such different stories. That's great. Celeste, did you talk about your publishing path yet? I think we started with.
No, but
yeah, go ahead.
I would agree with all the other authors where time is of essence. People think it's such a quick process, and it's so long by the time your book is accepted, goes through edits, hits the market, gets out on the shelves. I met agents through the Squaw Valley Community of Writers, which I'm an alumni on, and I had a lot of agents interested in my work. I ultimately went with a small publisher, and in the future, I probably wouldn't do that in the future. I would probably go with an agent if someone would take on my work, but I just want to let everyone know it does take time. Anyway, you have to do a lot of your own marketing. Even if you go with a large house, they're not going to do a lot for any author, especially a new time author. And I think a lot of writers don't recognize that. But the important thing is to get your work out there and keep fighting the fight or working on improving your craft.
Awesome. Thanks, Celeste. So for very different roads that you all went on. So I think that's a good thing for everybody to hear, that there's more than one way to get your book and your work out into the world. I'm looking at some of these questions as well. And so for the next question, I think this will answer some of the questions in the chat too, but if you could you tell us maybe what your most recent work is? I might have touched on it in the introductions, and then also let us know if you're working on something else for the future, or what your kind of what your future projects might be. Don't give us don't give away anything, but let us know how that's going to play out. Shirley, do you want to start?
Okay.
We do have some questions in the chat about, I'm not familiar with these books. Can you tell me what you've written?
Yeah.
So if you'll say again, yeah, show us your book if you have it. Great. Thanks.
Here's my book. This is my
Yay.
baby, right? My 74 years old, and I produced a baby, Heartwood. I'm so proud of this book, and in fact, I'm reading it myself right now. I'm finally reading it from the point of enjoying it, just reading it through to enjoy it. Anyway, so this book is about, it weaves together, like I said, three women that are bound together by the legacy of an ancient woman who had terrible visions of the Earth's future, and she needed to get this word forward in time. And so there's it's a process. It's part of the story. I won't give it away, but there's a desk, a family desk, that becomes the vehicle by which all the women are united and connected when they write on the desk, no matter which century they're living in. It's the family that unites them and enables them to reach across time to help each other do what needs to be done in that era to protect the planet. So there's a lot in there for everybody. And yeah, as Wendy said, it's become a great giveaway novel. Everybody's buying it to give copies to their friends, which
That's great.
to me, that's a real statement of how it's touched and resonated with even men. I've had two men that have bought 5 copies each to give to their friends. So anyway,
Great.
What I'm doing next is, I'm taking a break. I'm just enjoying this. I'm fixing up my website. I'm doing all the housekeeping around producing a book. But if I write another book, it will be based on a box of letters written between a man and a woman in the 1960s. He was in Vietnam. She was finishing up school in San Francisco. They discover the box of letters 50 years later. They're married, and they're going through the letters and reading them and sort of comparing the Vietnam era of unrest and political unrest and the summer of love and all that with what we're going through today, sort of, again, and that's based on, it's based on the letters that my husband and I wrote, to make it simple. So it's kind of a fun way to incorporate a memoir, but probably we'll fictionalize it a bit. Anyway.
That sounds great. I love the way that the timelines are meshed in all of your novels, or those two. That's a terrific element. I'm gonna move on to keep us going. June, do you want to talk about a little bit about the work that you just published, and then maybe what's on deck for you?
So this is the work that was just published, Farrell, North Carolina, 1965. And it has a 10-year-old protagonist who, and this is during an era of a lot of social unrest. So she's raised in a fundamentalist household. There's the household world, and then there's the larger world, and then there's the fact that she has a bike now. And the great thing about this world is it's before personal computers and telephones. So when you're gone, you're gone. There's no checking in. There's like, you're home for meals and you're home before dark. And the rest of the time, as long as you're not bleeding, you're good, So she goes out on adventures. The book that I'm working on right now is actually the same character, Willie, because she won't go away. She's just in my head. But it's 10 years later, and it's 1975, and she takes a job as an au pair in France. It's the first time she's ever been out of the South. And that also is, in a sense, not a coming of age in a traditional way, but it's certainly a coming to a recognition.
Yeah, thanks. That sounds fascinating too. Good luck with that. Celeste, do you have plans to write some more? And
so I had a children's story come out about Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and that was in a wonderful little multicultural children's magazine. And I'm happy to say I love personal essays, and I had a piece that won an award for the Preservation Foundation, which is this group that publishes stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And sadly enough, I can't read it without becoming emotional, but it's about my book is about my dad's story, and my essay is about helping him pass and holding his hand as that happened. So that piece won an award, and it's not only about that, it's about my feeling as a mother, and about being a daughter, and about being a parent. And yeah, so I work on a lot of different things, and I have been very active in the Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm a political person nowadays, so I do all the media for Citizens Climate Lobby for climate change. So that's a whole nother world for me, to write letters to the editor and research climate. So that's kind of my passion right now. And after that, I'm thinking of working on a memoir and getting an MFA. So that's kind of next on my on my world.
That's fabulous.
Amy, can I put a quick plug in?
Yeah.
Sierra Nevada University. We have a kick-ass MFA program.
Oh, you do? Okay.
And you got it in.
And such great
Director
stuff.
Brian Turner. Oh my God.
At the what school is that?
Sierra Nevada University.
Oh,
Incline.
Sierra Nevada College in Incline. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we
Thanks.
changed university. So
Okay. Cool.
so we quit being confused with Sierra College.
So talk about writing reading good things to inspire you. I read a piece in the New Yorker by Ann Patchett about when she went to a wedding of her sister, and all three of her dads were there. So she had her bio dad and two of her stepdads at a wedding for her sister, and she wrote this wonderful memoir. And I thought, wow. And I just finished reading a piece of fiction called Letting the Kites Fly. And it was first person. I haven't read fiction first person in a long time, and it read like a memoir. And I thought, well, maybe that should be my next project after these different things I've been doing, is to write memoirs. So, and do an MFA. So I think that might be cool. And I might retire from PT and do that.
Sounds like a plan. That's
Yeah.
great. I'm going to move on to Avanti. We have about 20 minutes left, or a little under, and I know we have some questions. So we're gonna finish this question and then try to wrap up with maybe one more. So Avanti, do you want to talk about what you're working on and what you've just worked on? There they are.
Yeah, so The Lost Power came out last November, and Solstice Shadows came out in August. And they're both Da Vinci Code meets Tomb Raider type international thrillers. And the first one is about an Aikido black belt, a Russian sniper, and the race to find Alexander the Great's mysterious Egyptian weapon. And the same characters take off then in Solstice Shadows, which, could be kind of fun for people to read around December 21st, because it's got some of that Indiana Jones type shadow and light clue type of element in there, where we have to run around the world to Chichen Itza and Artemis, or the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus and in Egypt and the like. So I like to combine, if you haven't figured it out, sort of international intrigue, history, science, and mystery. And with my IT background, some of the threats are around IT sort of stuff. So we get, in both of these novels, we have some sort of superconductivity is the MacGuffin that we're trying to find to save the world. And I also like to blend some themes in here too. So even though it looks like it might be pulp, there's a little bit of depth in there too. So the first one plays around with the idea of violence and nonviolence in our world, because our protagonist, as an Aikido black belt, gets suddenly thrust into this violent world where these Russian snipers are trying to kill her. And Aikido is all about nonviolence and using your attacker's energy to bring about a peaceful resolution. And she can't do that when she's being shot at from 100 paces. So she struggles with, her role and her power in bringing about, peaceful resolution for the world. And in Solstice Shadows, we've got a theme of perception and how we see things, as above, so below, and the filters that we all have, whether that's in relationships or as we're trying to track down clues, and how that can limit us, and the ways that we can change our perceptions can solve not only our personal problems, but can help the world at large. In terms of next projects, I just finished one that is pretty interesting in terms of current social events. It plays on propaganda, and a lot of people have seen the recent show, The Social Dilemma. So it takes some of that, but talks about propaganda starting all the way back with Cleopatra. And so again, it's got that intrigue, history, science, and mystery, a lot of action, shoot 'em up, bang, bang, but it also follows the hunt for her lost journal, and involves saving the US president from assassination and worse. So a lot of, global thriller type of elements here.
Does your new novel have a name yet?
Right now it's called Kiss of the Cobra, and it's
Okay.
currently being shopped. And I'm trying, as I mentioned earlier, trying to figure out what I want to write next. Do I want to write another Van Ops thriller? Do I want to carry on with the characters that I've introduced for Kiss of the Cobra? Or do I want to write something entirely new? So I'm also
Right.
taking a little bit of a break, and just kind of stepping back and thinking about where it all goes next.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Casey, I was going to ask, since I know we do have some questions in the chat, is it possible for you to post a link in the chat to the exhibit hall where people can find links to all the novels that the
Yes.
panelists have written? Okay, some people have gone there and some people have not, but we definitely have all these works and links to more information about them in our exhibit hall for the week. So that might help people as well. Okay, so we're going to wrap up the question part of this. We just have about maybe 5 more minutes or so so maybe a minute or so a piece. But if you want to close with how has COVID affected your work, either work in progress or marketing of work that you have just published during this time, which I know is fraught with all kinds of challenges for everyone, and I'm curious what that's like in the publishing world. And or if you would like to pass along any advice to aspiring writers about becoming a published writer, or just improving your writing craft. If you have some tidbits you want to pass along, that would be just great. So trying to think where I left off. Let's see. Celeste, how about we start with you?
Thank you, Amy. And I think it's funny that you use the word craft, because I was just saying work on your craft and take writing classes. Do online writing classes at Sierra College or now in the time of COVID, we can all do community college and college classes. If you have the wherewithal and the money and the time, work on an MFA. If not, do community college classes. At the least, join a writers group. I think that's a brilliant idea. Find writers groups through your local library, attend the Squaw Valley Community of Writers, and most of all, read. And read what inspires you. Read what you love. Read in your genre, read in other genres, but primarily read in your own genre you want to write in, but read what inspires you, read what you love, and read good work of others, and get help from others, because it's a solitary activity in the time of COVID. You can make it good. You can do classes at community college. And yeah, there's lots of resources out there. Contact your local library. Try to get your own critique group going, because that is a wonderful tool to keep you working. And it was brilliant for me and helpful. And I don't think I would have done it if not for my writers group.
Thanks. I'm going to piggyback on what you said just briefly. The Grass Valley Library hosts a weekly writing group for anybody who's interested at whatever level you're at, with prompts, and then everybody comes to a Zoom for an hour on Monday afternoons at 4. And yeah, it's a super great group. Casey is one of the people who co-hosts that group, so you can definitely find more about that on our website. And then I would also say Sierra Writers is a great place to connect with local writers. I'm not sure what's happening during the time of COVID, but they definitely have writers groups that are registered there that you can join as a new member or check out and try to find your place. So
and there's a group in Reno
resources.
called, I just thought of this now, New Riders of the Purple Sage, not new readers. And I think they have writers groups that you can join.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks.
I know.
Shirley, do you want to talk to us really quickly about like advice you might have for writers or what the COVID marketing process has been for you? We don't have a ton of time, so maybe choose wisely.
I published my book March 14, 2020, right as COVID just, and it turned out to be a blessing in disguise in many ways, because what it did is it just took me off the treadmill of that pulse of, of getting things ready to publish and all that has to be done. And, the book was out, so I was able to just sit back and relax and enjoy, take a break and just enjoy the feedback that people gave me from the book. And that's really why I did not write the book to make money. I keep reminding myself that anytime I start to get a little, I go, my reason for writing the book was I had something I wanted to say. I've said it. I think I've said it well. People are responding to it and so forth. So anyway, it was a blessing in disguise, and it will pick up again. We'll get back to other forms of marketing, but for right now, social media is probably the biggest. And then in terms of advice for people, I would say the same as everybody else said, find your community of writers. Sierra Writers is actually a great place. They're quiet right now, but they have writing groups, they have critique groups. They have a list of all the websites of authors. And I'm hoping that they can start a list of all the publishers, editors, copy editors and so forth around here. So that could be kind of a clearinghouse there. But just enjoy writing.
Thanks. Avanti, do you want to tell us kind of how the COVID has affected you or pass along some advice to writers?
Yeah, we actually decided to release Solstice Shadows a little early. It hadn't been quite a year, mainly because a lot of other authors were releasing in the now timeframe, November, December. A lot of other releases were pushed back, and so we wanted to catch summer when it was a little bit slower. And about the only thing I did differently from a marketing standpoint was didn't do any in-person events, but I still did. Oh my gosh, we had a NetGalley, basic giveaway. We had a Goodreads giveaway, BookBub ads, newsletters, social media. I have a marketing plan that's multiple pages long because once my first book came out, I realized, like everyone else is talking about, that publishers don't do much in the way of marketing and PR for you. And if you're traditionally published, you can often hire a publicist if you want to spend a lot of money. I did some of that and was able to get on radio and the like. And if you're indie published, you end up doing more like sales for discovery. So what I've heard from the international thriller writers and a number of other industry experts is that putting your book on sale, for instance, through BookBub, is one of the best ways for discovery. It used to be people would discover authors in bookstores, and now they discover them through weekly sales, Chirp, BookBub, Kindle Daily Nation, etc. In terms of advice for my younger self or my other writing people out there, there was a book that somebody gave me a long time ago called The Enneagram. It was written by Helen Palmer, and it's subtitled as Learning About Yourself and Others in Your Life. And not only was I able to use that to understand myself and my family better, but because I think that understanding yourself helps you to know whether you are an outliner or a pantser. And both are okay. It's just what's best for you, right? And how do you work? And if you're an outliner, maybe you give yourself permission to pants it once in a while. And if you're a pantser, maybe you give yourself permission to have a little bit of the structure or think a little bit more about the ending, right? And it's also been an excellent way to understand my characters because I'm able to pick their personality type. There's 9 different personality types in this ancient Sufi wisdom, which is the Enneagram, and that's spelled ENNEAGRAM. And so by understanding my character's deep personality and their deep fears, I'm able to write them much more authentically. So that's something, a little bit of advice I can give that's probably going to be different than the typical
Yes.
advice.
That's
I did the
great.
same.
That's awesome. Thanks, Amante.
Yeah.
June, do you want to finish us off? We just have a minute or so, and then we'll try and take a couple questions.
You've gotten some great advice here. I would add one old school bit of advice, and that's writing in your journal, which, you know, you probably have heard that since, I don't know, you were a little tyke, but it's still a good practice. And I think that the advice that I'm hearing is great advice. I have nothing to add to it.
So thank you so much, you guys. Casey, I know Casey's kind of been monitoring the questions. There's been some comments in the chat maybe more than anything. So Casey, is there anything standing out to you that we can ask people to address?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's really loving it. But yeah, we do have a couple of questions. One is specifically for Avanti that's pretty interesting. They said that your Van Ops books have a number of quotes from well-known authors, and they're wondering how you made that happen.
Yeah, so that's, I think, one of the tricks to getting it to sell well. And it really helped that I was traditionally published and I knew who my comp authors were: James Rollins, Steve Barry, Dan Brown. Well, Dan Brown doesn't blurb. So I was targeting Steve Barry and James Rollins. And I wrote Steve Barry. I wrote him. He said, yeah, no, kind of busy. And so I said, gosh, you know, I just really need Steve Barry. So I attended a class that he gave where he was talking about fortune favoring the bold. And, you know, you need to be out there and just ask for things that you need. And I said, okay, Steve, will you give me a blurb? And it turned out that the person who had been saying no was not Steve at all. It was somebody who had been managing his email account. And so I was able to get him a copy of the book and he gave me a wonderful blurb. With James Rollins, I had a similar experience where he wrote, or somebody on his behalf wrote and said, have your agent, talk to my agent. Well, that just disappeared into an abyss. So I went to one of his book signings. And I said, hey, my books are mostly like yours. You're my best comp author. He said, well, give me a pitch for it. And I did. I said, Tomb Raider meets Da Vinci Code. And he said, oh, I love it. Send it to me. So I did. And he wrote me the most amazing blurb imaginable, you know, calling my book a masterwork of international intrigue and a book that defines page turner. My jaw dropped. I mean, you know, basically this guy made my career jump from here to here just by virtue of him taking the time to do that for me. So it's about asking, but it's also about asking in the right way. It's about having your ducks in a row. So when I asked them, I gave them a marketing plan. I said, look, here's the money I'm planning on spending, and you're going to get all this free PR out of having your name on my book. And so I think that helped cinch the deal.
That's great. Nice.
Yeah. There is one more question. We have about 3 minutes left. If anyone has any thoughts, they said, for years, I have not met a fiction writer who outlines a book ahead of writing. So for those of you who do outline before writing, is this natural for you, or did you learn it from somewhere or someone?
So I outline, and it's very natural for me. I've always been an outliner, you know, a big picture thinker. It's just something that in the corporate world I've done extensively when I was working there, and it just really comes naturally to me. And what I do is I see the scenes and kind of the point of view, you know, of who's got most at stake in that scene. So I almost see it like a movie. And I get everything down in my outline except the dialogue and description. So kind of, where is it? What's the point of view? What's the conflict? You know, what's the outcome of that scene? And that's how my mind thinks. And then I'm much more able to make adjustments at that level rather than having, you know, 1,500 or 2,000 words written out in that chapter. Because once I write it, I get kind of attached to it and I don't want to throw it away. But at the outline level, I can say, you know what? I don't have nearly enough conflict in that chapter. I can kill that chapter and I'm not really losing anything. Whereas once I've written it, I'm like, no, I don't want to lose that, even if my editor suggests it. I'm like, oh no, but so for me, it's very natural. But I'd be interested in hearing what some of my cohorts also think.
Well, I don't have anything to say about outlining, but I do have to say, and I have to say this because one of the most prolific, wonderful writers of the world passed away a few months ago, Rodolfo Anaya. If anyone's familiar with his work, he is the father of Chicano literature. He got an honorary PhD. He taught at the University of New Mexico, and I just called him because his book was very similar to mine. And there was a curandera, which is a healer in the Latino community. And I called him. I got his name and number it's amazing how I got this information, just being sincere from the library in University of New Mexico. But Rodolfo and I wrote a review of my book. And the fact that such a marvelous, erudite icon would take the time to do that for me, an unknown. And I just was very, very sincere in reaching out to him. I literally called his house and he called me back. And that does not happen much. But I just want to say this is a man whom it just passed away. And the whole community is sad about this. And he was in his 80s and he read Bless Mi Ultima, which is made into a movie. It's so important for the Latino world to read his work and to read his books. And the fact that he did that for me was very heartwarming. So yeah, just be really sincere, I guess. And when you ask people for blurbs, and that's what I did. And he did that for me. So the world has lost a wonderful writer. I'm sure all the librarians know his work. And I just wanted to talk about Rodolfo.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we are about out of time. Shirley, I saw that you're answering some of the questions there in the chat that people had. So thank you for taking care of that. Thank you to all of you. You guys are just amazing. I know all the listeners have learned a lot, I'm sure, because I personally have learned a lot listening to all this. It's fascinating. I wish we had another hour. So best of luck to you in COVID. Congratulations on all of your success. And thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for putting it
Thank
together.
you for this opportunity.
Yeah, take care, everybody. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, everybody.